I was about to die with my crew in the Strait of Hormuz after we encountered huge wave crashes, but Jesus appeared and saved us.
My name is Elias Khoury, and I am the Saudi ship captain who saw Jesus Christ on the waters of the Strait of Hormuz in Iran. I am the man whose video testimony has been shared across the Middle East. I am the Jordanian who abandoned his faith for years, pretended to be Muslim in Saudi Arabia, captained oil tankers through the most dangerous waters on earth. And then one night, I had an encounter with Jesus in a dream so real that it saved my entire crew from certain death. People ask me all the time if the story is true. They ask me if I really saw him. They ask me how I knew the storm was coming to the Strait of Hormuz when there was no warning, no forecast, no sign in the sky. I tell them the same thing every time. I did not know anything. Jesus knew. He came to me while I was sleeping, and he warned me. He saved us. And when I woke up and gave the order to hold position, I was not acting on my own wisdom. I was obeying the voice of the Son of God. This is my testimony. This is how it happened. But before I tell you about that night on the ship, I need to take you back to where it all began. I need to tell you about the boy I was, before I became the man who walked away from everything. I was born in a small apartment on a quiet street in Madaba, Jordan, about 30 minutes south of Amman. My father's name was Hannah Khoury, and my mother's name was Rima. They were both born in Madaba, both raised in the church, both children of families that had been Greek Orthodox Christians for generations. In Jordan, Christians make up somewhere between 2 and 6% of the population, roughly 150,000 to 300,000 people depending on who you ask. We were a small community, but we were proud. We were ancient. Our roots in this land went back to the very beginning of Christianity itself, back to the apostles, back to the first churches that were built in the deserts and hills of the Middle East. My parents never let me forget that. They told me all the time that being a Christian in Jordan was not just a religion. It was an identity. It was a bloodline. It was something that our ancestors had protected with their lives for 2,000 years, and something we were expected to carry forward without compromise. But as I grew older, something began to shift inside me. I was a good student and I did well in school. I graduated from secondary school in Madaba and went to the University of Jordan in Amman to study maritime engineering. It was a field that fascinated me. I loved the ocean even though Jordan had very little coastline. I loved the idea of ships crossing vast distances carrying goods and connecting the world. My parents supported my education, but they were nervous about me leaving Madaba. Amman was bigger, busier, more diverse. They worried I would drift away from the church, from the community, from the faith. My mother made me promise again before I left. She said, "Elias, Amman is not Madaba. There are distractions. There are temptations. But Jesus is everywhere. Find a church. Keep praying. Do not let go." I promised her. But this time when I said the words, I was not sure I meant them, because deep inside me, a restlessness had been growing for years. A hunger for something beyond the walls of Madaba, beyond the incense and the icons, beyond the small safe world I had always known. I wanted more. I wanted opportunity. I wanted to see what was out there. And I was willing to leave everything behind to find it. Amman changed me. I arrived at the University of Jordan as a boy from Madaba with icons in his bedroom and incense in his memories. But within the first year, I began to feel those things fading like old photographs left too long in the sun. The university was massive compared to anything I had known. There were students from all over Jordan, from Palestine, from Iraq, from Syria, from the Gulf countries. There were Muslims, Christians, atheists, and people who believed in nothing at all. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who did not care about my faith, who did not ask which church I attended, who did not expect me to cross myself before meals or pray before exams. At first, this felt strange and uncomfortable, but slowly it began to feel like freedom. I told myself I was still a Christian. I told myself I still believed in Jesus. But I stopped going to church. I stopped praying. I stopped reading the Bible my mother had packed in my suitcase. I was too busy with studies, too busy with friends, too busy with the excitement of being young and independent in a big city. The maritime engineering program was demanding, and I threw myself into it completely. I loved learning about ships, about navigation, about the physics of moving massive vessels across oceans. I spent hours in the library studying hydrodynamics and propulsion systems and cargo management. I joined study groups with other students who shared my passion for the sea. We talked about our dreams of working on international ships, of traveling the world, of making good money in the shipping industry. None of them talked about God. None of them talked about faith. And I did not bring it up either. I did not want to be the religious one, the one who was different, the one who had to explain why he crossed himself or why he could not eat certain foods during Lent. So I stayed quiet. I blended in. I became like everyone else. And with each passing month, the boy from Madaba, who stood in the church of St. George holding a candle on Holy Saturday, felt more and more like a stranger, like someone I used to know, but no longer recognized. My mother called me every week. She would ask me how my studies were going, and I would tell her everything was fine. Then she would ask me if I had found a church in Amen, and I would lie. I would say, "Yes, Mama, I found a small Greek Orthodox church near the university, and I go every Sunday." She would sound relieved and happy, and she would say, "Praise God, my son is still walking with Jesus." And I would feel a knot in my stomach, because I knew the truth. I had not stepped inside a church since I left Madaba. I had not prayed in months. The Bible she gave me was still in my suitcase, untouched, gathering dust. But I could not tell her that. I could not break her heart. So I kept lying, week after week, month after month, until the lies became easy and the guilt became just another feeling I learned to ignore. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would return to the faith eventually. I told myself God would understand. But deep down, I knew I was drifting further and further away, and I was not even trying to swim back. I graduated from the University of Jordan with top marks in my class. My professors recommended me for advanced training programs abroad, and I applied to several maritime academies in Europe and the Middle East. I was accepted into a prestigious program in Alexandria, Egypt, where I spent 2 years training on actual ships, learning the practical skills of navigation and seamanship, earning my certifications step by step. Those years in Egypt were intense and exciting. I worked on cargo ships that traveled the Mediterranean, learning from experienced captains and officers who had spent decades at sea. I learned how to read the weather, how to navigate by stars when instruments failed, how to manage a crew of men from different countries who spoke different languages. I learned that the sea was beautiful, but also deadly, that it could turn from calm to chaos in minutes, that every captain carried the lives of his crew in his hands every single day. By the time I finished my training, I was a certified ship officer, ready to work on any vessel anywhere in the world. I was 26 years old, and I had never felt more confident or more ambitious. I returned to Jordan briefly to visit my family before starting my career. My parents were proud of me. My father shook my hand and said I had become a man. My mother hugged me and cried and thanked God for blessing her son with success. But I could see questions in her eyes. She looked at me differently. Like she could sense something had changed, like she knew I was not the same Elias who had left Madaba 5 years earlier. One evening she asked me to sit with her in the living room under the icon of Jesus. She took my hands and looked at me and said, "Elias, tell me the truth. Are you still walking with Christ?" I looked into her eyes and I could not lie to her face. So I said, "Mama, I have been very busy with my studies and my training. I have not been to church as much as I should. But I still believe. I still have faith." She squeezed my hands and said, "The world will try to take you away from Jesus, but he will never let you go. No matter how far you drift, he will find you. Remember that." I nodded and said I would remember. But in my heart, I was already planning my next move, already thinking about the job offers I had received, already dreaming about the money I would make and the places I would see. God was the last thing on my mind. The job offer that changed everything came from Saudi Arabia. A major shipping company based in Dammam was hiring officers for their fleet of crude oil tankers. The salary was 3 times what I could make anywhere else. The benefits were excellent. The opportunity for advancement was clear. Within a few years, I could become a captain, commanding my own ship, earning more money than my father had made in his entire lifetime. There was only one problem. Saudi Arabia was an Islamic kingdom. There were no churches. Christianity was not allowed to be practiced openly. Foreigners who worked there were expected to respect Islamic customs and keep their own beliefs completely private. For a practicing Christian, this would be a serious challenge. But I was not a practicing Christian anymore. I had not been for years. So when I looked at the job offer, I did not see a spiritual obstacle. I saw an opportunity. I told myself I could blend in, keep my head down, do my job, make my money, and leave my faith at the border. It would be easy. I was already living without God anyway. What difference would it make if I did it in Saudi Arabia instead of Jordan? I accepted the job and prepared to relocate. My mother was worried. She knew about Saudi Arabia, about the restrictions, about the danger for Christians. She begged me to reconsider, to find a job somewhere else, somewhere I could still go to church and live openly as a follower of Christ. But I reassured her. I said, "Mama, I will be fine." I said, "I will keep my faith in my heart." I said, "No one needs to know what I believe." She cried and prayed over me and made me promise to call her every week. I promised. Then I packed my bags, boarded a plane to Dammam, and left behind the last traces of the Christian life I had been raised in. I did not know it then, but I was about to enter the darkest and most spiritually empty years of my existence. I was about to become a man without a God, a captain without a compass, a soul adrift on a sea I did not understand. And it would take a miracle to bring me back. Saudi Arabia was everything I expected and nothing I was prepared for. When I arrived in Dammam, I was overwhelmed by the heat, the dust, the vastness of the desert landscape. The city was modern and wealthy, filled with gleaming towers and massive industrial facilities. The port of Dammam was one of the busiest in the Persian Gulf, a hub for the oil industry that powered the entire Saudi economy. Ships came and went constantly, tankers carrying millions of barrels of crude oil to destinations all over the world. This was where I would build my career. This was where I would make my fortune. I reported to the shipping company headquarters on my first day and was assigned to a crew on one of their large crude oil tankers. The ship was called the Al Faisal, a massive vessel capable of carrying 2 million barrels of oil. I stood on the dock looking up at it and felt a mixture of pride and fear. This was the biggest ship I had ever worked on, and one day I hoped to command it. The first few years in Saudi Arabia passed quickly. I worked hard, learned fast, and earned the respect of my superiors. I moved up the ranks from 3rd officer to 2nd officer to 1st officer. I learned every inch of the Al Faisal, every system, every procedure, every route we traveled. Most of our shipments went through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula that connected the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the open ocean beyond. The Strait of Hormuz was one of the most important shipping lanes in the world. Over 1/3 of all crude oil transported by sea passed through this corridor. For Saudi Arabia, it was the primary route for oil exports, the lifeline of the kingdom's economy. Every captain who sailed these waters knew the significance of the strait, and every captain knew the risks. The waters were busy and crowded with ships from many nations. The political tensions between Iran and the Gulf states made the region unpredictable, and though the weather was usually calm, the sea could turn dangerous without warning. During those years, I became very good at hiding who I was. When my colleagues asked about my background, I told them I was Jordanian, which was true. When they asked about my religion, I simply said I was a Muslim like them, which was a lie. It was easy to pretend. I learned the basic phrases, the greetings, the responses. I learned to say Alhamdulillah and Inshallah at the right moments. I learned to nod respectfully during prayer times, even though I never actually prayed. No one questioned me. No one suspected anything. In Saudi Arabia, people assumed that everyone around them was Muslim, unless proven otherwise. And I gave them no reason to doubt. I blended in perfectly. I became invisible. And with each passing year, the Christian faith I had been raised in faded further into the background until it felt like a distant memory, like a dream I had once had but could no longer remember clearly. I was not Muslim, but I was not Christian either. I was nothing. I believed in nothing. I lived for nothing except money and advancement and the next voyage across the sea. After 7 years with the company, I was promoted to captain. It was the achievement I had been working toward my entire career. I was given command of the Al Faisal, the same ship I had boarded as a young officer on my first day in Dammam. Now it was mine to lead. I had a crew of 28 men from different countries, including the Philippines, India, Pakistan, Egypt, and Indonesia. They looked to me for guidance, for decisions, for leadership. The responsibility was enormous. Every voyage we carried cargo worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Every voyage we passed through dangerous waters where a single mistake could result in disaster. Every voyage, the lives of my crew depended on my judgment and my skill. I took the responsibility seriously. I studied the weather reports obsessively. I maintained the ship meticulously. I drilled my crew constantly on emergency procedures. I was determined to be the best captain in the fleet. And for several years, I was. My record was spotless. My shipments always arrived on time. My crew respected me. My superiors praised me. I was living the life I had always dreamed of, but I was empty inside. And I did not even realize how empty until the night everything changed. It was a Thursday evening in late October. We had loaded 2 million barrels of crude oil at the Ras Tanura terminal, the largest oil port in the world, located on the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia. Our destination was Mumbai, India, a voyage that would take approximately 6 days. The route was familiar to me. We would sail southeast through the Persian Gulf, pass through the Strait of Hormuz, enter the Gulf of Oman, and then head across the Arabian Sea to the western coast of India. I had made this journey dozens of times. I knew every mile of the route, every landmark, every potential hazard. The weather forecast for the next several days was favorable. Clear skies, calm seas, moderate winds. There was no indication of any storms or unusual conditions. Everything pointed to a routine voyage. I briefed my crew, confirmed our heading, and settled into the rhythm of the journey as we pulled away from the terminal and headed toward the open water of the Persian Gulf. The first 2 days of the voyage were uneventful. The sea was calm, the sky was clear, and the ship moved smoothly through the water at its cruising speed of 15 knots. I spent most of my time on the bridge monitoring our progress, reviewing charts, and communicating with other vessels in the area. The Strait of Hormuz was always busy with traffic and coordination. With other ships was essential to avoid collisions or delays. As we approached the strait on the third day, I began to feel a strange uneasiness that I could not explain. There was nothing wrong with the ship, nothing wrong with the weather, nothing wrong with the crew. But something felt off. I dismissed it as fatigue. Captains are required to take mandatory rest periods during long voyages to ensure they are alert and capable of making critical decisions. I had been on the bridge for nearly 12 hours, and my first officer suggested I take a break. I agreed. I handed over command to him and went to my cabin to sleep. I expected to rest for a few hours and then return to the bridge as we entered the strait. I had no idea that what would happen next would change my life forever. I lay down on my bunk and closed my eyes. Sleep came quickly, which was unusual for me. Normally, I had trouble falling asleep on the ship, my mind racing with calculations and concerns. But that night, I fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. And then the dream began. It was not like any dream I had ever experienced before. It was vivid and clear, more real than reality itself. I could feel the cold spray of water on my face. I could hear the roar of the wind in my ears. I could smell the salt of the sea. In the dream, I was standing on the bridge of the Al Faisal, and we were in the middle of the Strait of Hormuz. But the water was not calm like it had been when I went to sleep. The water was chaos. Massive waves rose up around the ship like mountains, crashing against the hull with thunderous force. The ship was tilting wildly, first to one side then the other, barely staying upright. My crew was screaming, holding onto railings and equipment, their faces twisted with terror. I was shouting orders, but no one could hear me over the howling of the storm. We were going to capsize. We were going to die. I knew it with absolute certainty. There was nothing I could do to save us. And then I saw him. In the middle of the chaos, in the center of the storm, I saw a figure standing on the water. He was not being tossed by the waves. He was not struggling against the wind. He stood perfectly still, perfectly calm, as if the storm did not exist for him. I could not see his face clearly at first. He was a silhouette, a shape of light against the darkness of the raging sea. But as he moved toward the ship, walking on the water as if it was solid ground, I began to see his features. He had a beard and long hair, and his eyes were filled with a peace that I cannot describe in words. He raised his hand toward the storm and he spoke. I do not know what language he used, but I understood him perfectly. He said one word, peace, and the storm stopped. The waves flattened, the wind died, the ship steadied. Everything became still. Then he turned and looked directly at me. He looked into my eyes and I felt like he was looking into my soul, seeing everything I had ever done, everything I had ever hidden, everything I had ever been ashamed of. And he said, Elias, be patient. Do not pass through the strait yet. Wait, trust me. Then he was gone, and I woke up. I sat up in my bunk so fast that I nearly hit my head on the low ceiling above me. My heart was pounding in my chest like a drum. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My hands were trembling. I looked around my cabin trying to remember where I was, trying to separate the dream from reality. The room was quiet. The ship was steady. I could hear the low hum of the engines beneath me, the familiar sounds of a vessel moving smoothly through calm water. There was no storm. There were no waves. Everything was normal, but the dream had been so real, I could still feel the spray of the water on my face. I could still hear the screams of my crew. I could still see him standing on the water, his hand raised, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Peace. Be patient. Do not pass through the strait yet. Wait. Trust me. Those words echoed in my mind over and over. I did not know what to do with them. I did not know what they meant. I had not thought about Jesus in years. I had not prayed in years. I had abandoned my faith completely. Why would he come to me now? Why would he speak to me after all this time? I got out of my bunk and splashed cold water on my face from the small sink in my cabin. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a man I barely recognized. My eyes were wide with fear. My face was pale. I looked like someone who had just seen a ghost. And in a way, I had. I had seen the Son of God walking on the water in the middle of a storm that had not happened yet. I had heard his voice telling me to wait. The rational part of my mind told me it was just a dream, just my subconscious processing stress and fatigue, just random images and sounds generated by a tired brain. But another part of me, a deeper part that I had buried long ago, knew that this was different. This was not a normal dream. This was a warning. This was a message. And I had a choice to make. I could ignore it and continue on our course through the Strait of Hormuz, or I could obey the voice I had heard and tell my crew to stop. The first option was safe and logical. The second option was insane. What kind of captain stops his ship in the middle of a voyage because of a dream? I left my cabin and walked to the bridge. My first officer, Anwar, was at the helm, monitoring the instruments and the radar. He looked up when I entered and seemed surprised to see me. He said, "Captain, you have only been resting for 2 hours. You should sleep more. We are still 30 minutes from entering the strait." I nodded, but I did not respond. I walked to the window and looked out at the water ahead of us. The sea was calm and dark under the night sky. The stars were bright above us. There was no sign of any storm, no clouds on the horizon, no change in the wind. The weather instruments showed nothing unusual. Everything was exactly as it should be, and yet I could not shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. I could not forget the dream. I could not ignore the voice. Be patient. Do not pass through the strait yet. Wait. Trust me. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the water, wrestling with myself. And then I made the decision that would change everything. I turned to Anwar and said, "All stop. Hold our position here." He looked at me with confusion on his face. He said, "Captain, I do not understand. The weather is clear. There are no obstacles ahead. Why are we stopping?" I did not know how to explain it to him. I could not tell him about the dream. I could not tell him that Jesus Christ had appeared to me and told me to wait. He would think I had lost my mind. The whole crew would think I had lost my mind. So I said the only thing I could say. I said, "I have a feeling. Something is not right. We will hold here for a while and observe. That is an order." Anwar hesitated. I could see the doubt in his eyes. But he was a good officer, and he followed orders. He relayed my command to the engine room, and the ship began to slow. Within a few minutes, we had come to a full stop, floating quietly in the calm waters of the Persian Gulf, just 30 minutes away from entering the Strait of Hormuz. The other officers and crew members on the bridge exchanged confused glances. No one understood why we had stopped. No one dared to question the captain openly. But I knew they were wondering if I had made a mistake. We waited. The minutes passed slowly. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Nothing happened. The sea remained calm. The sky remained clear. The instruments showed no change in conditions. I began to doubt myself. Well, maybe the dream was just a dream after all. Maybe I was being foolish. Maybe I should give the order to resume our course and stop wasting time. The crew was watching me, waiting for me to say something. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could sense their impatience and confusion. I was about to give the order to continue when Anwar suddenly said, Captain, we are receiving a signal from the maritime warning system. There is an emergency alert for the Strait of Hormuz. I turned to him immediately. My heart stopped. He looked at the screen and read the message aloud. Severe weather warning. Unexpected storm system developing in the Strait of Hormuz. All vessels advised to delay passage. Dangerous wave conditions expected. Estimated wave heights exceeding 10 meters. Repeat. All vessels advised to delay passage until further notice. The bridge went silent. Everyone stared at the screen, then at me. No one spoke. The warning had come exactly 25 minutes after I gave the order to stop. If we had continued on our original course, we would have entered the strait just as the storm was forming. We would have been caught in the middle of 10-meter waves with 2 million barrels of crude oil in our tanks. The ship could have capsized. The cargo could have spilled. The crew could have died. All 28 of us could have perished in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz, and no one would have known why. But we were safe. We were floating peacefully in calm water, 30 minutes away from the disaster that was now unfolding ahead of us. We were alive because I had listened to a dream. We were alive because I had obeyed a voice that told me to wait. We were alive because of Jesus. I gripped the railing of the bridge and lowered my head. I was shaking again, but this time it was not from fear. It was from something else entirely. It was from awe. It was from gratitude. It was from the overwhelming realization that God had just saved my life and the lives of my entire crew. The God I had abandoned. The God I had ignored. The God I had pretended did not exist for nearly 15 years. He had not forgotten me. He had come to me in my sleep and warned me of danger that no instrument could detect. He had spoken to me by name. He had told me to trust him. And when I obeyed, he delivered us from certain death. I thought about my mother back in Jordan, praying for me every day, lighting candles in front of the icon of Jesus, begging him to protect her son. I thought about all the lies I had told her, all the promises I had broken, all the years I had spent running away from the faith she had given me. And I felt tears forming in my eyes. I tried to hide them from my crew, but I could not. They rolled down my cheeks, and I did not wipe them away. Anwar approached me cautiously. He said, "Captain, how did you know? The forecast showed nothing. The instruments showed nothing. How did you know the storm was coming?" I looked at him and I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to tell him about the dream, about the figure on the water, about the voice that said, "Be patient." But I could not find the words. Not yet. So I simply said, "I had a warning." He stared at me, clearly unsatisfied with the answer, but unwilling to press further. The other crew members were whispering among themselves and looking at me with a mixture of confusion and respect. They did not understand what had happened, but they knew something extraordinary had occurred. They knew their captain had just saved their lives with a decision that made no logical sense. And they were grateful. Over the next few hours, several of them came to me privately to thank me. Some shook my hand. Some embraced me. One man from the Philippines, a Christian named Eduardo, looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Captain, God was watching over us tonight." I nodded and said yes. Yes, he was. We waited for 6 hours until the storm passed, and the maritime authorities cleared the strait for passage. Then we continued our voyage to Mumbai without further incident. But I was not the same man who had left Ras Tanura 3 days earlier. Something had shifted inside me. Something had awakened. The emptiness that had defined my existence for so many years suddenly felt unbearable. The life I had been living, the lies I had been telling, the faith I had abandoned, none of it made sense anymore. I had met Jesus on the water. He had saved me, and I knew that I could never go back to pretending he did not exist. I spent the rest of the voyage in my cabin, alone with my thoughts, replaying the dream over and over in my mind. I remembered his face, his eyes, his voice. I remembered the peace that surrounded him even in the midst of the storm. And I remembered the words he had spoken to me. Be patient. Wait. Trust me. I had trusted him once, just once, and he had proven himself faithful. Now I had to decide what to do with the rest of my life. We arrived in Mumbai 4 days later, and I barely remember the journey. My body was on the ship, performing my duties as captain, overseeing the crew, monitoring the instruments, guiding us safely to our destination. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. I could not stop thinking about what had happened in the Strait of Hormuz. I could not stop seeing his face in my memory. I could not stop hearing his voice in my ears. Be patient. Wait. Trust me. Those words played on repeat like a song I could not silence. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing on the water, calm and steady, while the storm raged around him. Every time I tried to focus on my work, I found myself drifting back to that moment when he looked into my eyes and spoke my name, Elias. He knew my name, he knew who I was, he knew everything I had done, every lie I had told, every prayer I had ignored, every promise I had broken, and still he came to save me. That was the part I could not understand. Why would he save a man like me? Why would he bother with someone who had abandoned him so completely? When we docked in Mumbai, I had a few hours of free time before we began the process of unloading our cargo. I left the ship and walked through the busy streets of the port district, surrounded by the noise and chaos of one of the largest cities in the world. Vendors were shouting, cars were honking, people were rushing in every direction. But I felt completely alone. I felt like I was walking through a dream, disconnected from everything around me. I found a quiet spot near the water and sat down on a concrete barrier, staring out at the Arabian Sea. I thought about my mother in Madaba. I'm praying for me every day. I thought about my father, who had shown me through his life what it meant to serve God with integrity. I thought about the Church of St. George and the smell of incense and the voice of Father Youssef chanting the liturgy. I thought about the candles we lit on Holy Saturday and the words we spoke in the darkness. Christ is risen. Truly he is risen. For so many years those words had meant nothing to me. But now they echoed in my heart, with a power I could not deny. I wanted to pray, but I did not know how anymore. I had not spoken to God in so long that I did not know where to begin. I felt ashamed to even try. Who was I to approach him after everything I had done? I had denied him. I had hidden from him. I had pretended he did not exist so that I could fit in and make money and live a comfortable life. I was a coward and a liar and a fraud. But sitting there by the water in Mumbai, surrounded by strangers who did not know my name or my story, I felt something breaking inside me. The walls I had built around my heart were crumbling. The emptiness I had carried for so long was demanding to be filled. And the only thing that could fill it was the same thing I had been running from my entire adult life. I lowered my head and closed my eyes. And for the first time in 15 years, I prayed. I said, Jesus, I do not deserve your mercy. I do not deserve your love. But you came to me anyway. You warned me. You saved me. You saved my crew. I do not understand why, but I am grateful. I am so grateful. Please forgive me for turning away from you. Please forgive me for all the years I wasted. If you will still have me, I want to come back. I want to follow you again. I want to be yours. I do not know how long I sat there with my head bowed and my eyes closed. It could have been minutes or it could have been an hour. But when I finally opened my eyes, something was different. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for as long as I could remember was gone. The emptiness was still there, but it no longer felt hopeless. It felt like a space waiting to be filled, like a room that had been cleaned and was ready to receive a guest. I did not hear any voice from heaven. I did not see any vision or sign, but I knew in my heart that something had changed. I knew that Jesus had heard me. I knew that he had forgiven me, and I knew that my life could never be the same again. I stood up from that concrete barrier a different man than the one who had sat down. I was still Elias Khoury, captain of the Al Faisal, employee of a Saudi shipping company, pretender and liar. But inside, in the deepest part of my soul, I was something else now. I was a prodigal son who had finally come home. The voyage back to Saudi Arabia was long, and I had plenty of time to think about what I was going to do next. I knew I could not stay in the kingdom forever. I knew I could not keep pretending to be Muslim when my heart now belonged to Jesus. But I also knew that leaving would not be easy. I had a contract with the shipping company. I had responsibilities to my crew. I had a life and a career that I had spent 15 years building. I could not just walk away overnight. So I made a plan. I would finish my current contract, which had 6 more months remaining. I would save as much money as possible during that time. And then I would resign from the company and return to Jordan. I would go home to Madaba. I would walk into the church of St. George. I would confess everything to Father Youssef. I would ask for forgiveness, and I would rededicate my life to Christ. That was my plan. But I knew that the next 6 months would be the hardest of my life. I would have to continue pretending, continue hiding, continue lying. I would have to wear the mask of a Muslim captain while my heart was secretly crying out to Jesus every day. Those 6 months were a test of everything I had. Every day, I woke up in Saudi Arabia knowing that I was living a lie. Every day, I went through the motions of my job, leading my crew, navigating my ship, delivering my cargo. Every day I heard my colleagues talking about Islam, about Allah, about the Prophet Muhammad, and every day I stayed silent, nodding along, pretending to agree, hating myself for my cowardice. But at night, alone in my cabin, I would read the Bible on my phone. I had downloaded an app in Mumbai, hidden deep in my device where no one would find it. I read the Gospels first, hungry to learn more about the Jesus who had appeared to me on the water. I read about his miracles, his teachings, his death, his resurrection. I read about the disciples who had left everything to follow him. I read about the early church that had spread across the world despite persecution and suffering. And I wept. I wept for all the years I had wasted. I wept for the faith I had abandoned. I wept for the mother who had prayed for me every single day and never given up hope that her son would return to Christ. I also prayed constantly during those months. I prayed in silence, in my heart, where no one could hear me. I prayed when I woke up in the morning. I prayed when I went to sleep at night. I prayed when I stood on the bridge watching the sun rise over the Persian Gulf. I prayed when I walked through the port of Dammam surrounded by people who had no idea who I really was. I talked to Jesus like he was standing right beside me because I believed he was. I told him my fears, my doubts, my struggles. I asked him for strength to endure, for wisdom to know what to do, for courage to face whatever came next. And he answered me, not with visions or dreams like before, but with peace. A deep, steady peace that settled over my heart and never left. Even when I was afraid, even when I felt alone, even when the weight of my secret threatened to crush me, that peace remained. It was his presence with me. It was his promise that he would never leave me or forsake me. And it was enough to carry me through. Finally, the 6 months ended. My contract was complete. I submitted my resignation to the shipping company, and they were surprised but did not try to stop me. I had been a good captain, and they offered me more money to stay, but I declined. I told them I had family matters to attend to in Jordan, and that I needed to return home. They wished me well and thanked me for my service. I said goodbye to my crew, the men I had led through calm seas and dangerous waters, the men whose lives I had saved because Jesus had warned me in a dream. Some of them shook my hand warmly, others embraced me like a brother. Eduardo, the Filipino Christian, pulled me aside and whispered, "Captain, I know something happened to you on that voyage. I can see it in your eyes. Whatever it was, hold on to it. God has a plan for you." I thanked him and told him I would never forget him. Then I boarded a plane to Amman and left Saudi Arabia behind forever. The plane touched down at Queen Alia International Airport in Amman on a cold Tuesday morning in December. I pressed my face against the window as we descended and looked at the landscape below me. The brown hills and scattered buildings of Jordan spread out in every direction under a gray winter sky. I had seen this view many times before, returning from voyages all over the world. But this time it felt different. This time it felt like I was seeing my homeland for the first time with new eyes. I was not returning as the ambitious young man who had left Madaba 15 years earlier chasing money and success. I was not returning as the empty, directionless soul who had spent years pretending to believe in nothing. I was returning as a man who had met Jesus Christ on the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. I was returning as a man who had been saved, not just from a storm, but from himself. As the plane landed and I walked through the terminal, I felt a sense of purpose I had never felt before in my life. I knew exactly where I was going. I knew exactly what I needed to do. And for the first time in a very long time, I was not afraid. I took a taxi from the airport directly to Madaba. It was about a 45-minute drive south of Amman, and I spent the entire journey staring out the window at the passing landscape. I passed through familiar towns and villages, past olive groves and stone walls and small roadside shops. Everything looked exactly as I remembered it. Madaba had not changed much. It was still the same quiet, modest town I had grown up in, full of history and community and the kind of slow, steady life that people in big cities never understood. When the taxi pulled into the streets of the old town center, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear. Something more like longing. Like a hunger that had been building for years and was finally about to be satisfied. The driver dropped me off near the church of St. George, and I stood on the pavement outside with my single bag and looked up at the familiar stone building. The same heavy wooden doors, the same bell tower, the same worn stone steps that I had climbed hundreds of times as a child. I had dreamed about this moment during those long nights on the ship. Now that it was here, I could barely move. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Incense. That same deep, rich smell that had filled my earliest memories, that had meant safety and belonging and the presence of God. The church was mostly empty at that hour, just a few elderly women sitting quietly in the pews, their heads bowed in prayer. The icons stared down from the walls, the same painted faces of saints and apostles I had grown up with. At the front of the church, near the altar, a figure was moving slowly, arranging candles and preparing for the morning service. It was Father Youssef. He was older than I remembered, his hair completely white now, his movements slower. But it was him. The same man who had chanted the liturgy at my baptism, who had given me my first communion, who had stood at the altar on Holy Saturday and said Christ is risen with a voice that filled the entire church. I walked toward him slowly, my footsteps echoing on the stone floor. He turned when he heard me and looked at me for a moment without recognition. Then his eyes widened and he said, "Elias? Elias Corey? Is that you?" I nodded, and then I broke down completely. I stood in the middle of the Church of St. George in Madaba, and I wept like I had never wept in my life. Not the quiet, private tears I had shed on the bridge of my ship or on the waterfront in Mumbai. These were deep, heaving sobs that came from somewhere so far inside me that I did not even know the place existed. Father Youssef came to me quickly and put his hands on my shoulders and said, "My son, what is wrong? What has happened?" I could barely speak. Between sobs, I managed to say, "Father, I need to confess. I have been away for so long. I left the faith. I left everything. But Jesus found me. He came to me. He saved me. I want to come back. I want to come home." Father Youssef did not look shocked or angry or disappointed. He looked at me the way my own father would have looked at me, with compassion and relief and love. He pulled me into an embrace and held me for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Welcome home, Elias. The church never stopped praying for you. Jesus never stopped waiting for you. Come, let us talk." We sat together in a small room behind the altar for over 2 hours. I told him everything. I told him about leaving Madaba, about drifting away from the faith in Amman, about moving to Saudi Arabia, and pretending to be Muslim. I told him about the years of emptiness, about the loneliness, about the hollow feeling that no amount of success or money could fill. And then I told him about the dream. I told him about the storm and the waves and the crew who were screaming in terror. I told him about the silhouette on the water, about the peace that surrounded him, about the storm stopping when he raised his hand. I told him about waking up and giving the order to hold position, about the crew's confusion, about the 30 minutes of waiting, about the maritime warning that came in and confirmed everything the dream had shown me. I told him about praying in Mumbai, about the 6 months of secret faith in Saudi Arabia, about reading the Bible alone in my cabin every night. Father Youssef listened to every word without interruption. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Elias, what you have described is not unusual in the history of our faith. Jesus has always appeared to those who are lost. He appeared to Paul on the road to Damascus. He appeared to the disciples on the water. He appeared to you on the Strait of Hormuz. He finds us wherever we are. The question is never whether he will come. The question is whether we will listen when he does." You listened, and that took courage. Father Youssef led me through a formal confession that afternoon, the sacrament of repentance that is central to the Greek Orthodox faith. I knelt before the altar and I spoke every sin I could remember, every lie, every act of cowardice, every year of abandonment. I said them all out loud, holding nothing back, letting everything that had been buried inside me for 15 years come to the surface. And with each confession, I felt lighter. I felt the weight lifting off my shoulders piece by piece. When it was done, Father Youssef placed his stole over my head and prayed over me, asking God to forgive me and restore me and renew me. Then he said, "By the grace of God and the mercy of Jesus Christ, you are forgiven, Elias. Go and sin no more." I pressed my forehead to the cold stone floor of the church and I wept again. But these tears were different. These were not tears of grief or shame. These were tears of relief, of joy, of a man who had been dead and was now alive, who had been lost and was now found. I went to my parents' home that evening. My mother opened the door, and when she saw me standing there, she put her hand over her mouth and started crying before I could say a single word. She pulled me inside and held me for a long time, rocking back and forth the way she used to when I was a small child. My father came into the room and placed his hand on my back, and the three of us stood in the hallway of that small apartment in Madaba, crying and holding each other. I told them everything that night. I told them about Saudi Arabia and the pretending and the emptiness. I told them about the dream and the miracle and the crew being saved. I told them about Mumbai and the prayer and the 6 months of secret faith. My mother listened with tears streaming down her face, her hand gripping mine so tightly that it hurt. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "Elias, I prayed for you every single day. Every single day for 15 years, I lit a candle in front of the icon of Jesus and I asked him to bring you back. And he did. He always does." My father said nothing for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, "I am proud of you, son. Not because you became a captain, because you came home." In the weeks that followed, I rejoined the Greek Orthodox community in Madaba. I attended the Sunday liturgy every week. I took communion for the first time in 15 years. I reconnected with people I had grown up with, neighbors and friends who welcomed me back without judgment. I started a Bible study group in the church with Father Youssef's blessing. I shared my testimony with the congregation one Sunday morning, standing at the front of the Church of St. George and telling the whole story from beginning to end. When I described the dream and the miracle at the Strait of Hormuz, the church went completely silent. When I finished, there was not a dry eye in the building. Father Youssef stood up and said, "This is what our faith teaches us. Jesus is alive. He is not a historical figure trapped in the pages of an old book. He is living and active and present in the world today. He walks on water, he calms storms, he saves the lost, and he will never stop reaching for those he loves." The congregation responded with a long, thunderous Amen that echoed off the stone walls of that ancient church. Word of my testimony spread quickly through the Christian community in Madaba and then across Jordan. People who heard the story wanted to know more. They wanted to hear the details, to understand exactly what I had seen, exactly what I had heard. Someone suggested I record a video of myself telling the story so that more people could hear it. I was hesitant at first. I was a private man. I was not used to speaking publicly about personal things. But I thought about Eduardo, the Filipino crew member who had told me to hold on to whatever had happened to me. I thought about Father Youssef saying that Jesus found me because he loved me. And I thought about all the people out there in the world, sitting in darkness the way I had sat in darkness for 15 years, empty and lost and searching for something real. If my story could reach one of them, if it could show one person that Jesus was still alive and still moving in the world today, then it was worth the discomfort of speaking out. So I agreed. A team from a Christian media ministry based in Amman came to Madaba and filmed my testimony over 2 days. We sat in the Church of St. George, surrounded by the icons and the candles and the smell of incense that had defined my childhood. I told the story the same way I have told it here, from the beginning, leaving nothing out. The video was posted online, and within days, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Within 2 weeks, it had crossed 1 million views. Messages flooded in from people across the Arab world, from Jordan, from Lebanon, from Egypt, from the Gulf countries. Muslims who had been secretly questioning their faith wrote to say that my story had given them courage. Christians who had drifted away from the church wrote to say that my testimony had brought them back. Sailors and maritime workers from around the world wrote to say that they had experienced similar things on the water, moments where the presence of God was undeniable, where no natural explanation was sufficient. One message came from a Saudi man who said he had watched my video in secret and that he had been having dreams of Jesus for months and did not know what to do. He asked me how to pray to him. I wrote back immediately. I told him exactly what to say. I told him Jesus was already waiting. All he had to do was speak. I am still in Madaba today. I am not a ship captain anymore, I do not think I will ever return to the sea professionally, though I do not rule anything out. What I know is that my calling now is different. My calling is to tell this story to as many people as will listen. To tell the world that Jesus Christ is not a figure of the past. He is not a prophet who lived 2,000 years ago and left nothing behind but words in a book. He is alive. He walks on water. He enters dreams. He speaks to lost and broken men on the decks of oil tankers in the middle of the Persian Gulf. He saves crews from storms that no instrument can predict. He waits patiently for 15 years while a prodigal son wastes his life pretending to be something he is not. And when that son finally turns around and comes home, he is already there at the door, arms open, ready to receive him. That is the Jesus I met on the water. That is the Jesus I serve today. And if you are watching this and you feel the same emptiness I felt for all those years, if you have been running from him the way I ran, if you have had a dream or a moment or a feeling that you cannot explain, I want you to know that it is him. He is reaching for you. All you have to do is stop running and let him find you. Write in the comments right now, Jesus walks on my waters too. Let it be your declaration that no storm is too great, no distance is too far, and no soul is too lost for the Son of God to reach.